You ever experienced elections devoid of any form of violence in Nigeria? That's a rhetorical question, right? But have you considered the protection of journalists who bring updates on facts and figures of elections to the comfort of your home? That's what we're talking about now, the safety of journalists during electioneering process. Although no journalist was killed on election day in 2019, 250 of them were molested across the country, particularly by overzealous law enforcement agencies. Among the 250 were those who were also attacked while covering campaign activities. Outside elections, 9 journalists have been killed, and there have been no investigation, let alone prosecution of the killers. Let's hear from some journalists now who shared their experiences while covering elections in Nigeria.
Heavy security presence. Yes, security is very important, as we know, during elections, but sometimes it can be too, it can be superfluous, too much. When you have so much security presence and they don't differentiate from the journalists from the touts. Some of them treat the journalists as if they are the rogues. Security officials are there to prevent vote buying, election rigging, and all that. But sometimes they can be.
If there is electoral violence, for example, the law enforcement agents are supposed to evacuate the INEC officials and the journalists from the scene of electoral violence, but you see them ignoring the journalists. For God's sake, we're partners in progress and we want the best, for the country. So they should see us as partners in progress, really.
One of the challenges I've seen so far is that of mobility. Most media houses don't normally provide such logistics for them to move about, because on election day, every year will be short and so on. So some press guys, some of them may end up taking Okada, and that is very, very expensive, especially when you are going to remote areas also. I think that is a key problem.
One of the elections that I must tell you that yes, I was pained actually, because I was beaten. That was in Akwa Ibom 2000 and I think 2015. In Akwa Ibom 2015, when I will cover the election there.
Police are critical stakeholders in this election, and our safety and security is paramount. For more on this development, let's talk to Executive Director, International Press Center, Larry Arogundade. Mr. Arogundade, thank you for joining us on the countdown. You've been at the vanguard of the advocacy of journalist protection. Talk to us about what you think is the sense of danger journalists are exposed to during elections. Mr. Arogundade, if you can hear me, I'm asking how endangered you think journalists are during elections.
The statistics which you quoted, incidents of attacks. What do you say?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead with the contribution.
Hello?
Go ahead, Mr. Arogundade.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was saying that the statistics which you quoted earlier on, about 250 journalists being attacked or molested during the 2019 elections, actually came from the monitoring by the International Press Center, which underlines the problem that we are discussing. The fact that, so our greatest worry was that some of these journalists were actually accredited to cover the elections by INEC, and ordinarily that should mean protection for them by the police and other, by the law enforcement agencies, particularly the police, and the soldiers deployed on electoral duty. But we discovered that this fact was not respected, and there were all kind of problems in different areas. In some cases, the problem came from overzealous political party supporters who just felt that maybe some journalists, because you work in a particular medium, they assume that you are loyal to one party or the other. So we have this problem, and that's why for the past couple of weeks and days, we've actually been looking at safety of journalists covering these 2023 elections, particularly given what is happening around the country now. I featured at a program in Abuja where this matter came up. Unfortunately, the spokesperson for the DSS, Dr. Afunaya, was actually at that program. And what we discovered really is some kind of, misconception about what our roles, should be, or the perception that probably some of them have when you talk of the security agencies, because they were raising issues of quack journalists, journalists who are not well trained, who are not doing their job. And we try to say that, look, let's separate the wheat from the chaff. We shouldn't mix up the issues. Journalists who get accredited by INEC are definitely not quacks. They are professional journalists who have been cleared by the organizations to get, accredited. And so to that extent, they need to have, some, respect, for them. Of course, there are issues too about, the accreditation, because what we've also discovered is that even though you might be accredited as a journalist to cover the elections, there are also certain limitations. So, for example, from TVC, they might accredit, let's say, 100 journalists for TVC to cover the elections, but not all of them would be accredited to go to the collation centers. And again, that is also one problem area. So we have to engage in education on both sides, talking to the security agencies to protect and respect the rights of journalists, because they are frontline workers during the election. But at the same time, talking to our colleagues to also know that you might be accredited to cover the elections, but if your accreditation does not allow you to go to collation center, it will be better to avoid that so that we don't have this clash with security agencies that keep repeating itself. So these are the real dangers. Of course, the other dangers are when violence suddenly breaks out. And of course, this usually comes from politicians. And journalists want to capture, all these events. So what we've been saying to the security agencies is that, look, your responsibility is to maintain law and order, but also know that it's important for journalists to be there, because the Electoral Act, the laws of the Federation, their role empowers them to monitor and cover elections. So to that extent, there must be some level of understanding, and they must be treated with restraint, even where you feel that there have been some, alleged, breaches.
Absolutely. So you're saying that education is key for both sides, particularly journalists and also security agencies.
Very, very key. Education
Absolutely.
is very key for both sides, so that we don't have a repeat of these incidents.
250 molested in 2019. How do you think the figures are coming up in the days leading up to this election? Do you think things are getting better as to the security of journalists?
Well, not not necessarily. Although, if we look at pre-2023 and compare it with pre-2019, we've not really had the kind of incidents that we had. Remember the call that some of our colleagues, unfortunately, were caught in between during the crisis in Lagos State at the campaign rally, and some of them, about 3 of them, were hit by stray bullets. Those were extreme, cases, and but we've not had that. But of course, we also know that there have been problems between journalists or media organizations, and particular and some, political organizations. We know that journalists, covering the rallies, have faced situations where they have to find a way of, running or taking care of themselves. I mean, the stampede in Sokoto, for example, during the presidential rally. So all these things affect journalists one way or the other. And so we talk about the need to recognize elections as a form of conflict. And when journalists are being sent to cover that, they will need some protection. So we're not looking in the direction of the security agencies alone. We're also looking in the direction of media owners, media employers. The basic questions of insurance cover, for example, for journalists who will go, on the field. Because if you look at now, earlier on, you were talking about the role of civil society. And that was quite interesting, because one of the things the civil society organizations have been doing, for example, is to look at the threats to election security. I recall that sometime, I think about 2 weeks ago or less, we were in Abuja together with, Yaga Africa, IPC, TAF, and a number of civil society organizations, Institute for Media and Society, and the rest of them, where we presented the election, manipulation index, where we looked at scenarios of possible manipulation of elections, and which means that those areas, if elections are manipulated, could be prone to violence. Organization like Clean Foundation regularly releases what they call a threat to election security. So already there are flashpoints across, the country. And what we think we should do in the media is we need to, well, we shouldn't be sensational, we shouldn't raise alarm, but we need to report what we call early warning signals. We shouldn't just treat those information as mere statistics. We need
And
to go
journalists have
beyond
to
those
be
reports.
in the know. I get it very
Exactly.
precisely.
So we need to interrogate them.
Yes.
So
We'll
where we're
have-
talking of likely outbreak of violence or manipulation, so it's our duty now to engage duty bearers, those who are responsible for maintenance, law and
Indeed.
order.
Absolutely.
And then INEC itself. So what are you doing about these scenarios that have been painted? Because our fear is that when things get out of hand, journalists
Indeed.
get caught in the crossfire, and we don't want that. And
We'll
I
have
think it's also one
to-
of the reasons why
We'll have to find time to continue this conversation, Mr. Rogunade, particularly
very
given
much. I
your
could see that
robust
you're trying to
experience in
stop
this
me. That's
field.
fine.
We'll also talk about
Thank you very much.
what you think journalists have to do to keep themselves safe. Larry Rogunade is Executive Director, International Press Center. Thank you for talking to us on The Countdown.